the S&P 500 has been performing well recently, and that is largely to do with the US presidential election. While editing this video, I realized I wanted to make a couple points clear. The first is I'm not supporting any US political party for the upcoming election in this video. And the second is what we're looking at is the trends that have taken place over the last few weeks. And not necessarily we're making a forecast from that, but it's important to look at the trends that are taking place and in the context of what's happened in the last few elections as well, because we could see something similar coming up shortly. If we take a look at the seasonal pattern for the S&P 500 around US presidential election, what we find is the S&P 500 tends to perform poorly in September and into October, which hasn't happened this year. And that's largely to do with anxiety that investors feel before the US election, coming in and worrying about who's going to be the president and what it might mean for the country. That tends to get resolved sometime late in October or November, early November, before the election. We find the stock market bottoms at that time, typically, and then moves higher starting before the election. And if we take a look back at 2020, we saw that cycle take place. The stock market bottomed in late October and then moved higher from there. If we take a look at 2016, when Trump was last running, the stock market actually didn't bottom until early November. Now, what we saw was the investors at that time were really concerned about Trump being president. And the narrative at the time was that if Trump becomes president, that's going to be bad for the country. Well, 2 days before the presidential election, investors started to say, well, he's proposing tax cuts. And that could be good, at least in the short term, and move the economy higher and the stock market. And so the stock market bottomed in early November before the election. Trump was elected and it continued up from there and had a really strong 2017 as well. I'm filming this video in the Catskill Mountains in upper state New York while visiting my daughter for the weekend. Absolutely beautiful, beautiful country and a beautiful day today. Well, right now what's happening is we're seeing the probability of Trump winning the election increasing. If we take a look at the Polymarket, the world's largest prediction site, they have the odds of Trump winning the presidential election moving up quite sharply, and that's been very recently in October. Investors have responded by pushing the S&P 500 higher, and that's largely the result of investors looking at the overall policies without being political. Trump is proposing some tax cuts. Harris is largely proposing a lot of tax increases. Investors are saying, well, tax cuts really could help move the market higher. And so we're seeing that push with the stock market because of that taking place. If we take a look at some of the sectors that could benefit under Trump, such as the transportation sector, because of an overall domestically focused agenda, actually performed extremely well recently. And has been outperforming the market. The financial sector as well did extremely well back in 2016 when Trump was elected. We're seeing that actually move a little bit higher here at the same time. The small cap sector did extremely well back in 2016 when Trump was elected, at least for a month or two or a month and a half. And this time around, we're not seeing the same response from the small cap sector, really responding and performing particularly well. Yes, it has had a little bit of a bump in outperforming the S&P 500, but we haven't seen that strong outperformance that we've seen, for instance, with the transportation sector. Something to watch out for. Overall, though, investors are responding to the increased probability that Trump's going to win the next election in a positive fashion and pushing the stock market higher. Now, I want to say that we don't know who's going to win, and maybe Harris does win. And I don't think it's the end of the world necessarily if Harris does win, because I think the media will try to find a way to spin a positive economic backdrop for Harris, saying their policies will help with the market. And I think That could actually help bolster the market as well, maybe not by as much, but the overall seasonal tendencies after election are for November and December to be quite strong, and into the new year as well. So right now, investors are favoring Trump, and that is helping to push the market higher. We're going to have to see what happens with this election coming up and see the response.